Hi people. Today we are going to talk about queen endgames. Queen versus queen and queen versus pawn. So when both players have a queen on the board, it is very difficult to win. Draw by perpetual check and stalemate occur often in this endgame, causing the game to end in a draw. Draw by perpetual check is just giving check after check and the enemy king can't stop the checks from coming. Stalemate is when it's a player's turn and they have no legal moves, so it's just a draw. The player going for a draw can generally force perpetual check if there aren't enough or any defending pieces around. If you have a good chance of winning a queen endgame, you have to be cautious, make an effort to avoid perpetual check. Here you can see white planning poorly and getting a perpetual check. If they have decided to promote differently, then perpetual check wouldn't have happened. Now to get a stalemate you need to have no legal moves, and a good way to do that in an endgame is to sacrifice material with a forcing move that puts an opponent's piece on a square that leads to stalemate. And what's the most forcing move of all? A check. As you can see, white gives a check forcing black to take the queen and cause a stalemate. King activity is a little different in queen endgames. In most endgames the king is free from mate danger, but sometimes in queen endgames it can be mated. The queen loves to harass the king and things can get pretty ugly if you're not careful of where you move your king or your defending pieces, because one slip up and suddenly you're checkmated in the middle of the board. Now let's get into queen versus pawn. This position, one player is able to be promoted sooner than the other. White is one more move away from promoting. If the white pawn was able to promote, it would have been a draw. Now, white's pawn didn't make it, so now they have to hold a draw somehow. So there is a small checklist to see if it's a draw. Queen versus pawn can be a draw if the pawn is a bishop or a rook pawn. The pawn is one rank away from promotion, and the king has to be near the pawn. In this case white can hold a draw because their pawn is a rook pawn, the pawn is on the 7th rank, and their king is nearby. Now white doesn't have any other pawns and the enemy king is far away, which helps too. Having no other pieces helps because that means no other legal moves, so a big chance for stalemate, and if the enemy king were to be closer there would be more mating threats. Now from here you can see black give a check and white moves in front of the pawn trying to get a stalemate. Well, black moves their queen so that it's not a stalemate and white moves out of the way to threaten promotion, another check. White goes into hiding and this process is just repeated. Black can't make any further progress and white can't either. Now if it were a bishop pawn things would be a bit different. You're still going to go for a stalemate, but this time you are moving away from the pawn into the corner when given a check instead of in front of the pawn. If they take the pawn it's a stalemate, no legal moves. If there were any other pawns on the board this wouldn't be able to happen because a move is available. These types of draws are only possible with the enemy king far away, because if they were closer you can get mating threats pretty easily like this. Now let's look at queen versus a king, queen or knight pawn. Well, if you have the queen then you have very good chances of winning. Let's look at this position. White has a knight pawn on the 7th rank getting ready to promote it, while black has their king far away with a queen. To win against king, queen, and knight pawns you first need to move your queen as close as possible to the pawn without letting it promote. So check here, check there, another check, and a quiet move. Black doesn't give a check or take anything, they get their queen really close to the pawn. White tries to protect the pawn but is given another check and forced in front of the pawn. If it went away they would have lost the game. Now with the white king in front of the pawn, black moves their king closer to the pawn. Promotion is now threatened again. Black pins the pawn, forces the king into the corner, and gives another check to force the white king in front of the pawn, and black brings their king closer. Now you just repeat this over and over until the king is close enough to where you can finally give checkmate. Now don't ever give the checks on the ranks or diagonals. Just open files. Giving checks on the files is a good way of forcing the enemy king in front of their own pawn, allowing you to bring your king closer. So how do we beat king, queen and knight pawns? We first bring our queen as close as possible to the pawn without letting it promote, give checks on open files to force the enemy king in front of their own pawn. Once their king is in front of their pawn, we move our king closer. Repeat until your king is close enough to give checkmate. So, yeah. Queen endgames. I think it's going to be a while before I get back into any other endgames. I think I want to go for middle games next, still not sure. But other than that, please subscribe if you liked the video and want to see more. Goodbye people.